Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. If you have problems with the IRS, don't focus on the negative, focus on the solutions. With the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For over 15 years, he's been helping taxpayers with IRS problems reclaim their lives and their financial stability. Now, here's your host of the IRS Solution Attorney Show, Darrin T. Mish.
Welcome to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I'm your host and the IRS Solution Attorney, Darrin T. Mish. For those of you who are regular listeners to the show, you know that I have a lovely and talented co-host, Katrina Madewell. And Miss Madewell really apparently misjudged her drive time today. Now, in fairness, I'm going to be slightly fair to Katrina here for a moment. You know, traffic in the Tampa Bay area this morning is really a mess. I guess there's an overturned car on the Howard Franklin Bridge, and the Gandy Bridge is a mess. She was the one that insisted that I take the Gandy Bridge, and instead of taking her sage advice, I decided to just use my handy-dandy Waze app, and it told me to take the Courtney Campbell.
Just hit right there on the left.
So apparently, Miss Madewell is joining us by phone today. How are you?
Oh, I'm on the Gandy Bridge about a mile out, still in bumper-to-bumper traffic.
Well, you know, this happened one time when we were on another show, and thankfully nobody actually listened to that station because I was really, really nervous, and I was really, really terrible on that occasion, and I think I'm a little bit more comfortable today. Plus, I have an old radio veteran here, Pat George, who's here to bail me out if I start to...
You're doing fine.
So apparently there's really, really bad traffic. You're stuck in traffic. But Katrina, I
know. You're used to me sitting right there next to you holding my hand, and now I'm like in the car doing the show with you.
Yeah, usually, you know, your hand actually turns red because I'm squeezing it so hard because I'm so scared. It's like someone who has
that. No, he doesn't.
It's like someone who has a
He's
phobia.
He's an IRS attorney. He's a beast.
And, you know, people get in accidents when they talk on the phone, Katrina, so why don't you just come here to the radio station?
Yeah, she's probably not even using a hands-free device.
She's probably not.
Yes, I am.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm on the phone all the time. I'm a real estate agent. What are you thinking?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I blew up. You're right.
So, you know, Katrina, today we have a really exciting show. It's really cool. We've done this once before with him by phone, but we've never had an actual client live in studio today. And today we have John, who's actually one of my clients, and he's a really great guy. I've known him for a long time. You're going to hear that story in a minute. But John is here today joining us in studio. I don't think his mic's on, though.
Yep, it's on now. I'm glad to be here.
How you doing, John?
Doing well. I'm glad to be in the control center and seeing things. I listen to the show all the time. It's just awesome to be here and see what you guys do.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of neat. There's like a lot of electronic gadgets in here, and everybody here at the station's really nice and friendly and helpful and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, but the traffic here is crazy. How do you know, I'm not from Tampa, so I'm not going to throw too much shade on what's going on.
We can tell by that accent that you're not from Tampa.
Yeah, don't hold that against me.
It sounds like you're almost from Canada. Where are you from?
I'm almost up in Michigan, up in Lansing, Michigan, so pretty close to Canada.
It sounds like he enjoys cheese, doesn't it?
Yeah, I do like cheese.
So,
and the traffic is usually not this bad. I mean, I would say, and Pat George can probably back me up, but it would take anybody commuting in this traffic at least an extra hour to get wherever they're going, minimum, if they're heading that direction.
And speaking of cheese and you being out there in the traffic, you know, maybe you would need to stop and buy us breakfast, Katrina. Take your time. Get us breakfast.
Yeah,
I'll take you out for breakfast after the show.
Donuts, something like that.
I coffee this morning.
Oh, well, that's actually the reason why you're actually still in traffic. You didn't get your coffee, and so you didn't have the lead foot. But, you know, I live in...
get heckled. I knew it.
I live in Pasco County, and it took me 2 hours and 15 minutes to get to the studio here today in St. Petersburg. And you know what? I still had enough time.
And it normally takes you how long?
It usually takes about an hour and a half, just because of the time of day.
Yeah, but you know what? Okay, so I'm going to throw Darrin under the bus because his wife, Heather, takes the kids to school, where my husband goes to school earlier than me, and I had to drop my oldest one at school on the way to the studio.
Well, you know, there's a little saying about excuses, but I won't say that on the air.
That's fine.
Anyway.
Totally fine.
Anyway.
You know, I've been telling you for a while, because, you know, every week Darrin talks about all these crazy stories that we saw. Some of them are fabulous. Some of them are not, as wonderful as the one the week before. But in any case, he always gets through it. And I tell him all the time, why don't you bring your customers in the studio? Like, ask one of your clients if they'll come share their story. They don't even have to give their real name. But I think just hearing it from somebody else like John, versus you and I talk about it every week, Darrin, it's different.
Yeah, for sure. John is actually, fairly intimately involved in my business as well, because he started out as a vendor to me. He does some content creation and some internet kind of stuff, for lack of a better term, for me on the internet. And the great thing about John was, well, first of all, we ended up being friends because we have so much in common. He's such a great guy. But then the funny thing about John's story is, so he knows I'm the IRS solution attorney. He helps write the outlines for the shows. Without John doing the outlines, the show would not be as good as it is. And but it took John a year or so to tell me that he actually had a tax problem, and I thought that was interesting. Tell me a little bit about why it took you so long.
Well, I was hiding it from you. I buried it deep, and my wife, she goes, you got to talk to Darrin about our tax problem. And I was like, well, in good time. And you know what? Once I started listening to your show more and started listening to you and interacting with you, I just felt a lot safer to come to you and tell you that I had a problem.
So it sounds to me like almost that you had some, I don't mean this in a harsh way, but you almost had some emotional baggage wrapped up in that.
It was mostly emotional.
And even though, you and I had developed a genuine friendship, and, you knew what kind of person I was, and you'd heard by after a year, you'd heard lots of stories. It's still, you just didn't feel comfortable telling me about the fact that you had a tax problem. And it was probably because you just felt like, maybe you were the only person who had made mistakes like you had made. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I was ashamed. I didn't want to really tell you. I mean, you're a great client. You're my friend, and I don't tell my other friends my problems. I try to keep my problems to myself, and I try to solve the problems myself. And so I was burying it, and didn't want to tell you about it because mostly I was embarrassed over it.
Yeah, it's really insightful to hear that, because, I've been helping clients with tax problems for 16 or 17 years. And the idea that a prospect or a client or a person would be that ashamed of having just a problem that I talk about every single day, all day, that it's really kind of refreshing to hear your perspective, because obviously now in hindsight, there was no real reason to be ashamed. I mean, if I passed judgment on every client that I've ever represented, I'd be judging the whole world constantly, and that's not really how I'm wired. But, I've shared on air before, and I'll do it here again. I've actually had a tax problem. That's how I got into the business of tax problem resolution. Was I had actually gone to law school, and in law school, they don't teach you anything, like nothing, about how to run a business or how to run a law firm. And so I can remember vaguely an accountant that I was using kind of vaguely explain, you're supposed to make estimated tax payments, and this is how you don't fall behind on your taxes and stuff. And I was a young buck, and I can remember kind of nodding, and in my inner voice was like, yeah, that doesn't sound like fun. I'm not going to do that. And so I ended up owing quite a bit of money to the IRS. And when I went to look for help, and I was ashamed. I can remember that now that you mention it. I was ashamed, and I can remember going out and looking for help, and I just couldn't find any help. And so I kind of had to just kind of figure it out. And I can remember this very vividly. I was either engaged or I can't remember if I was dating my wife, engaged, or newly married, but she didn't know. And the last thing in the world I wanted her to know was I owed the IRS like $20,000, which in hindsight is like laughable because it's such a small amount of money, but compared to what I deal with every day. But I can remember really being fearful of rejection, that if she found out that she wouldn't love me and she'd leave and things like that. Ultimately, that's not what happened. I mean, she was just as understanding as can be, which is great because it turned out to be a great life partnership. But I can remember that shame, and there really is no need, just because it's a problem that people are making decisions today that are going to lead to tax problems in the future. Now, if you know better, you probably shouldn't do that. But there's a lot of people like you. You kind of didn't know better. Is that right?
Yeah, you mentioned estimated tax payments. I had no idea what that was. And definitely I didn't want to give away any of the money I was making. I was just out having fun spending money. My monthly income had become what my annual income had been the year before. So all of a sudden there was all this extra money in my bank account, and that meant we could go do all the things we the fun things you get to do with money. And so, yeah, I didn't know anything about the taxes, and it snuck up on me.
So John, that's our signal that we're coming up on a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about your story and how you felt about it. And then probably a little bit later, we're going to talk about what the ultimate solution is going to be and how you feel about the IRS and how you feel about being current with your taxes right now. This is the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, typically, but not today, joined by my trusty sidekick, Katrina Madewell, who is stuck in traffic and has gone radio silent on us. But today, I have a really exciting guest, a great friend of mine.
And I'm actually in the parking lot, so I'll be with you in a moment.
Okay.
But, I do have a question, Darrin, and, if I was in the studio right now, which I will be in a second, I would pop in and I would ask John, because I noticed he said in the last segment he had an issue, a tax problem with the IRS, and he was trying to resolve it on his own. And I was curious, what were some of the things that he tried to do on his own to resolve his tax problem?
Oh, his mic's not hot.
That's a good question, Katrina. What I did was just buried it and tried to make more money. I focused on what I was good at, and which was making money, and I figured that the only way I was going to get out of the problem, was to make money. And to me, that was the only solution. The problem was that excess baggage from having the problem was keeping me from being effective, from actually making more money that I needed to pay the problem off.
And I think that's really typical, but it's counterintuitive because as you're being a typical guy, actually. You're like, I'm just going to solve this problem with blunt force. I'm just going to push harder. I'm going to work harder. I can do it. And I admire those characteristics a lot. I have a lot of those characteristics myself. But the problem was, as you made more money, what were you doing? You were incurring even more tax debt. So it's like, you're like, I'm going to dig this hole deeper, but faster. So let's back up and talk about, how much. Well, first of all, let's back up all the way even farther. Just a few years ago, you had a tremendously successful internet business, and you were making like $80,000 a month. Is that about right?
We went from the year before that, I think 2010, we made $75,000, and then we started making that every month. And I almost had rock star status in the internet marketing community, and it kind of went to my head, and I kind of started spending money like I was a rock star. And so it was a very big boom time for us, and it was an awesome time, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. But yeah, so the money came in just all at once, like in truckloads, and it was awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like a good time. And you were an internet marketing rock star, and you still are. It's just right now you just hit some rough spots. Google did some things that none of us could have predicted. But you'll get back on top again, and it's just a process. When you're self-employed, you're a small business owner, and lots of those are listening to us today, you realize that this life of ours that we've chosen, it's a roller coaster. You get to the top, you go down fast, you get back up to the top, and eventually the ride's over. Hopefully it's not over too soon, though, So how much money did you owe?
I think $140,000. I think when the first tax bill came, and here's how out of touch I was. I didn't start thinking about my taxes until February of the next year, and because I was now it's time to get our taxes around, and then the CPA asked me, well, how much have you been paying in the estimated taxes? And when he gave me what my tax bill was going to be, I literally almost vomited. It was that high of a bill. He goes, you're going to need $150,000.
Yeah, and the problem is that people don't really think about it if you've never had this problem is, okay, so you owe the IRS $150,000 or $140,000, whatever it is. And if you don't just have that sitting in the bank or paid in estimated tax payments, you're going to have to earn that money, right? Well, you're going to have to pay tax on the money, the new money that you're earning to pay off the old tax bill. So it's like double. So now you have to earn something like $300,000 just to break even. Now, so the thought is, like, how are you going to do that when you went from $75,000? Well, we haven't got to this part of the story yet, but you were making $75,000 a month, and now it's like $75,000 a year. Well, that's just not going to happen. You're not going to find an extra $150,000 to $300,000 just lying around.
But those are the clients you love.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why John's
here.
Then
you go in here and you go, you don't have any money to pay. What can we do?
Exactly. That's why John is here in the studio, because he is my people. I won't give it away, but we're working together, and John is going to be an IRS train wreck of the week. Right now, he's on the front end of that story, where the IRS train wreck of the week is the segment and the last segment of the show where we talk about people who came into the office and their life is just a wreck. They owe, in John's case, $150,000 to the IRS, and that might get worse before it gets better, frankly, because we have some returns we still have to file. But then ultimately, we're probably going to file an offer in compromise, and he's going to be one of these success stories, and he's going to. He's going to go off and become a fabulous smashing success again in the future.
I'm curious, when we get to that place and he is the train wreck of the week, can you actually do it with us? Like, you be on the air and you'll do the train wreck?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here, and I'm going to make an offer that he will not be able to refuse. I'll pay for his plane ticket to come down here, and we'll do a whole hour show where it's like an hour-long train wreck, and we'll just talk about the process that John went through. Now, I think we're probably a year or two away from that. But
it baffles me how long it really takes. Like, we say that every time, but like when you're in the middle of talking about it, it's surreal, I guess.
Hey man, we're going to be living hopefully in a year or two anyhow. So it's we might as well get rolling on it and get started and get this thing resolved. But I can see it, John. I can see this in my mind so clearly the day that I get to tell you, oh yeah, it's taken care of.
It's brave of you, really, to appear in studio, especially being in the middle of the storm, right? Because you can't always see clearly in the middle of the storm.
Yeah, I don't really view it as the middle of the storm because when I handed this issue to Darrin, my business changed immediately at that point because that baggage that I was carrying of trying to solve this problem myself was gone. I said, good, I know Darrin well enough that he's going to take care of this problem. Now I can focus on building my business and getting aggressive with my business and having a positive mindset about who I was as a person. And I can't. That's something I didn't have until I gave the problem to Darrin. So already I consider it a success of hiring Darrin to take care of the problem.
So we talk about this every week, but I'm assuming in the middle of the storm, you're working that train wreck out. So now the money that you're making, you're paying estimated payments as you go, correct?
Yeah, well, Darrin got us set up on something pretty cool. So now I'm on payroll. So instead of having all the money just go to my bank account, then have to pay the government, I'm getting paid a salary, and the money's coming out of my check immediately. So that helped immensely, and I think that's when the turning point was in my mind. That, hey, I'm going to be able to survive this. And not only am I going to survive in this time, I'm not just going to bide my time and get out of the situation until the situation is solved and I can start building my business at that time. I'm going to start rebuilding my business now because I just handed it to Darrin.
Plus, you have a budget to work with.
Yeah.
Doesn't it feel great? We've talked about this before. Doesn't it feel great to now know, like, okay, I get X amount of money, paid per 2 weeks or month or whatever it is. And when that money hits your checking account, doesn't it feel great? You're like, yeah, I have already paid the taxes on this money. This is my money.
Yeah, I feel like I can complain about politicians now. I have the right to complain because I'm paying my taxes.
Yeah, before you're like, you didn't feel like you could actually call yourself a taxpayer. You're like, I'm a tax bond payer and I'm unhappy about how things are going.
I think once you have that problem, you tend to pay the IRS before you pay yourself. You're like, I don't want this hole again.
Oh, for sure. Hopefully that's what people do. I can tell you
well,
from
those
experience.
Your repeat clients don't.
Yeah, I can tell you from experience there are some people it takes, 2-3 times to get the message, hey, you probably should pay your taxes first and then worry about everything else later. But, I don't stand a judgment. Like, I'm here to help people. And I want you to know, John, that I appreciate the trust that you've placed in me immensely. You're not, this sounds bad, you're not just a client. You're my buddy. And, we're going to take care of this. There's not going to be any problem at all.
No
and
doubt about
I see you treat all your clients like that, though.
I do, but
I mean, so I want the person listening to realize that if they come in, it's not like this normal, like, attorney-client relationship. Like, you really do reach out to them, and if you smirk, it's just because you know that you can handle their problem.
Yeah, I try to treat every client like they're my buddy, honestly. And there's some people who are really amenable to that, and there's some people who are like, no, I'm going to keep you at arm's length, and that's okay. I mean, we don't go out for beers and stuff, but I take this role of mine really seriously. And when I took this sounds really corny, but it's heartfelt. When I took the oath of attorney and I raised my right hand, I believe in those things.
But that was your left hand, Darrin. So do that again. Just playing.
Okay, for those of you who are watching on the radio today, I actually lifted my left hand because it's the one closest to Katrina, the person who couldn't get here on time today.
That was me.
But anyway, John, it's really nice to have you here. It's you're from Michigan, right?
Yeah.
And so describe some of the things that you saw for the first time since you've been here in Tampa for a couple days.
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, if you fly me down here, I fly first class.
Well, okay, we'll negotiate that
All right.
later.
Well, we can negotiate now if you
Hey,
want.
coming to Florida from Michigan, any class is good.
I was going to say, especially depending on the time of year, right?
Actually, I was just talking to my family. It's been hotter up there than it's been down here since I've left.
See, it's all good. This is the perfect
I
climate.
brought the good weather.
So you were telling me you saw a dolphin off
Oh
the
yeah,
balcony?
we did all kinds of cool things. We stayed at the we're staying at the Sailport Suites, and it's right on the water, right on the old Tampa Bay. We got to see some dolphins come in and feed. We saw something that it was a huge fish. I'll come from the dock. It was 4 foot long. It was awesome. So Tampa's a great place. We love it here.
We have so much to see and do that I don't think people even know how much there is to do here.
Absolutely. I mean, I moved here originally from California a long time ago, over 20 years ago, in part because I love the water and I love warm weather, and this is the place to be for sure if you're into those kinds of things.
Well, you're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show, and in studio today we have John, which is one of Darrin's clients, and we're sharing all about his experience working with Darrin during the process. We'll be back after we take a real quick break. Stick around if you have a question. You can call in. We will take it. 888-404-1010, 888-404-1010. In the meantime, Pat George is going to give you an update on traffic.
All right, you are. And we got big problems still. It's going to be the Howard Franklin Bridge is what you want to avoid. Veterans, you can get back on that. All those lanes are open. But Howard Franklin still got 2 lanes blocked into Pinellas County on 275. Avoid it if you can.
Are you suffering from IRS problems? Do you owe back taxes you can't pay? Is your paycheck or bank account being levied? Or maybe you haven't filed tax returns in years and simply don't know what to do. This is Darrin T. Mish to tell you that if you're tired of IRS problems hanging over your head and are ready for a fresh start, we may be able to help. Call the law offices of Darrin T. Mish at 888-GET-MISH, 888-GET-MISH. I can help you file old tax returns, work to release tax liens or stop wage levies, even negotiate deals to pay off back taxes at a discount, sometimes for pennies on the dollar. Hey, let's face it, these days it's not hard to get into tax trouble. A divorce, failed business, health problems, you name it. The point is, IRS problems may be solved if you're willing to take the first step. Call for a free consultation at 888-GET-MISH. That's 888-438-6474. Or go to the web at getirshelp.com, because the one sure thing is, IRS problems don't solve themselves. So get Mish. 888-438-6474. Principal Office, Tampa.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney, joined here finally
By the co-host, finally, in studio, Katrina Madewell. That's me.
Today,
I was
again,
here, though. I didn't leave you, even though I joined by phone.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. Recapping, today we have a very special guest here in the studio today. It's one of my clients. His name is John. John's from Michigan, and John has an IRS problem right now, and he owes it somewhere between, I'd say, $140,000 and maybe as high as I don't want to freak him out and make his palm sweaty. It might be as high as $200,000 or $300,000. We're not really sure yet because we have some returns that still need to be prepared. He just grimaced and gave me a dirty look just now.
Penalties and interest, and he's wiping his arm.
Yeah, just remember that bigger cases are easier to settle than smaller cases. So, and when we're at this stage where we've kind of got things stabilized and we know we're going to do something, then it's kind of good that you're going to owe more money because ultimately it's going to be a little bit easier to resolve.
And I have a feeling you're in very good hands with Mr. Mish.
Oh, I know it. I feel it 100%. As soon as, like I said, once I knew that Darrin was the guy to take care of the problem, that first of all, there was a solution to my problem. Because once the money wasn't coming back into my bank account like it was before, and I wasn't earning that type of money, I didn't think there was going to be a solution. But once I got to listen to Darrin's show and working with him, I knew that there was a solution. And just handing that off to him was just awesome. It was
What did you think when you were listening to some of those podcasts, like in these stories week after week?
Well, I think I knew I was going to eventually have the conversation with him, but I was putting it off.
How the heck do I tell him? How do I tell him? I want to be your client.
Well, I don't remember exactly. What did I say when you told me?
You're like, you have an IRS problem? And I was, yeah, I do have a slight one. He goes, what do you owe? And I said, $150,000. And then you're like, oh, we need to talk. And then you laugh and called me a dope or something.
Well, because usually it's not a slight one. Usually they say, oh, I owe a lot of money. And Darrin's like, well, how much is a lot of money to you?
Yeah, and a lot of money can mean, it can run the range from some people, I ask them how much they owe. They say a lot of money, and I say, well, how much? And they say $1,000. And $1,000 is a lot of money, depending on what you were.
Just not to the IRS.
Yeah, depending on what you were going to spend it on, right? And then sometimes somebody will say, it's $23 million. I go, and then I kind of smile and I go, yeah, you're right. That is a lot of money. No matter how you look at it.
This one's going to be fun.
Yeah,
Yippee!
those really big cases that get into the multi-millions are really fun because I don't have to work real hard to convince the IRS that you can't afford to pay, $23 million, right? So in your case, I don't think it's going to be all that hard to convince them that now, especially that your business is, not bringing in $75,000 a month gross, and that's kind of an important distinction. You're grossing like $75,000 a month, right?
Right. With our overhead was 1%. And it was just nothing.
Well, I can guarantee your overhead was higher than 1% because the tax burden alone was probably like 28%.
He left that part out of the equation,
exactly.
Darrin.
Yeah,
so,
it was.
you had a silent uncle in that deal that actually wasn't getting his money.
He had his hand in your pocket. You just didn't know it.
Yeah. Your Uncle Sam was like, what?
He's making up for it now.
Exactly.
So what were you worried about? Like, what was the things that really just kept you up at night? Because we hear these stories all the time from Darrin's perspective and the people that he represents. But what really bothered you? Like, what were you like, oh, God, I can't get this out of my head. I can't shake it. It's keeping me up.
Well, initially it was going to prison. I know people go to jail or prison for this sort of thing. And I knew that if I went to prison, I wasn't going to be able to support my family. And so I was really worried about that, probably for a few months. And it was like the kind of worry where not like you're worrying that your team's going to lose in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. It's the kind of worry that makes you vomit and makes you hyperventilate. I had several visits to the emergency room in that initial 3 months once I realized I had a problem. I thought I was having a heart attack, but it was just anxiety attacks. And it was not a very fun time to be alive for me.
I wowould say a good man's biggest fear is that he's going to let his family down.
Yeah.
And you have a number of children. I forget. It's like enough for like a football team.
Yeah, not quite. Yeah, we have 7 kids. We have.
I thought I had a lot of kids.
A grandchild at home too, and they're all at home. And so we have enough to field a football team probably if we play both sides of the ball.
I guess that's what they do in Michigan.
And going back a second there, what is your team for the 7th game in the Stanley Cup?
The Bolts. The
Go
Bolts.
Lightning.
The Bolts.
Okay, good.
Tonight's do or die. That's what I heard.
He's like, where am I? Okay, yeah, the Bolts, exactly. By the way, we're not going to lose in a hypothetical 7th game of the Stanley Cup Finals. That just will not happen. So, anyway, is Detroit still in the playoffs?
No, Our hockey season in Michigan ended a couple months ago.
Oh, gotcha.
We just need new officials for this game.
Yeah, well. But officials, if you're listening on the air today,
you live in Tampa, right? You live in Tampa.
It's all good. So, yeah, so I think that a good man's biggest fear is letting down his family, and I'm sure that's what was going through your mind. I mean, it turns out in hindsight, needlessly, but you're worried that you're going to be letting your wife down and your kids and your grandkids and all these people because you're the breadwinner for this entire clan, right?
Right. We have several family members that work for us as well, too. So it was everything I do for my family. And that's something that they push me forward to become what I do. And you know how many hours I work. I work 13, 14 hours a day, and everything I do for them, everything I do is for them. And so when it got to a point it looked like I might let them down, it just broke my heart. I couldn't look at my kids the same. I mean, it just was hard.
I'm a guy that really focuses on work-life balance. I believe that we work when we work, and we should be with our family when we're not working, because that is why we're working. And I can tell you that I'll see John online, or he'll text me or chat me on Facebook. That's how we communicate for work reasons. And he'll send me messages at 11 o'clock at night.
I'm up.
Working on my stuff, and I'm like, John, dude, you need to chill out. You need to go have some fun.
I know, for me, I always have so much stuff to do that by the end of the day, it still keeps me up because there's always things that I didn't finish, and it drives me nuts.
Surrounded by type A people here in the studio today, and everyone would think it would be the lawyer who would be the type A guy, but apparently not. John is so into his family that actually he has a family member here in the studio today who's silent. We didn't give her a mic because she didn't feel like she wanted to be on air, but this is a dedicated family guy, and I can see how having a tax problem and making a financial mistake could really be trying for people. But the good news is I don't think I've ever had a tax problem that could not be solved. There's always a solution. Now, there are people, unlike John, who won't take the steps that need and won't do the things that need to be done to solve a problem. But I made the suggestion to John that he go on a payroll service and then he just put himself on a salary and have taxes withheld, because that's going to really help us in our further future negotiations with the IRS. We're going to be able to tell him, well, look, he gets it now.
That's a good point.
He's paying his taxes and it's all good. But you wouldn't believe how many people I make that suggestion to, and they just look at me like, you're crazy, man. I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm doing it. But when I made that suggestion to John, I don't even think there was any hesitation. He's like, really? I can do that? And it's that cheap? Okay, it's done. Consider it done.
Yeah, well, giving my problem to you, I have to do what you suggest. And every suggestion you've made has helped my business, has helped my frame of mind. So why wouldn't I do what you...
I was listening to what you said, too, about a couple trips to the emergency room and that kind of stuff. And just thinking about the medical expenses alone, especially for a self-employed person, that's way less than what you're going to pay an attorney like Darrin to handle the problem.
Oh, yeah. Well, the good part is I got a good stress test. I had 3 stress tests taken care of, and I had all the blood work done, so, hey, I'm healthy.
The stress test, I just love those. I mean, they about kill you on the treadmill, and then they're like, nope, you didn't die. Okay, you're good.
He's still kicking. Let's torture him a little more. Well, should we answer a couple of questions that we got on Twitter?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay, so let's see. Rick here wants to know, is there a certain amount of money the IRS lets me keep a month if they garnish my paychecks? Good question, Rick. Thanks.
There is a certain amount of money, and it's a ridiculously low amount of money. I think it's publication 1494. I'm not totally clear on that, but I think it's publication 1494. There's a table that you get for wage levies. Remember, wage levies are continuous, meaning they don't stop. Once the wage levy is put in place, then it stays in place until either the balance is paid or somehow we can beg and plead with the IRS to release the wage levy, and sometimes they won't do it.
Which is different than when they swoop your bank account or freeze it. Or
is it true that they take your wages, your bank account, anything you get, and they even will go after your Social Security check?
Yeah, they actually can go after Social Security retirement checks. They just in the last few years have come up with a policy that they're going to benevolently not take Social Security disability checks. That's really nice of them, don't you think? I mean, they're not going to take your Social Security disability check. But, typically Social Security retirement checks are levied initially at a rate of 15%, and then they can go to 30%. And just in the last few years, they've decided they believe they can go to the entire Social Security retirement check, so that's sort of interesting. When it happens, there's just things that you have to do to get into compliance. The typical problem when you cannot get a levy released or wage levy released is the person is not considered current. And current means they have missing tax returns, their withholding is incorrect for some reason, they're not making estimated tax payments if they're self-employed, that kind of thing. And it can put some people into an almost non-winnable situation. So they're not current. Let's say they have 3 years worth of tax returns to file, and the IRS is levying their wages or their Social Security to such an extent that they don't have enough money to pay to get their tax returns prepared. And now they're just in this catch-22 where somebody like me calls and speaks to a revenue officer, for example, and we say, hey, how about you let the wage levy go so we can get these missing tax returns filed? And they say, sometimes they just say, no. I don't want to do that. I don't have to do it. And then there's other things, more complicated things that we have to do to try to get the wage levy released.
But it would make sense to me that if they're visiting somebody like you, they're clearly planning to take action to fix whatever that issue is and get back in the system, as they say.
One would hope that would be the inference that was made from that, but there are sometimes IRS employees that don't share that attitude. And that's why, honestly, when I try to work with local IRS employees, and really all of them, I try to make it as less confrontational as I possibly can, because this doesn't have to be adversarial. It's one of the things that's attractive to the job is it's not, like when litigation attorneys go at it, I mean, they're just ruthless. They're terrible to each other. They're not courteous. They're rude. And it's really a kind of practice that's not attractive to me.
Then they go,
all.
oh, let's have a beer when it's all done.
Yeah. Well, my experience says I don't want to have a beer with anybody that I've ever engaged in litigation with because I don't like them after it's over. But,
somebody's going to lose.
So with the IRS, sometimes I can kind of draw back on the relationships that I've developed over many years with these folks. Again, they know that I'm a straight shooter. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it unless I can't. And we'll get the case, resolved that way. Right now, there's some newer revenue officers in town, and it'd be awesome if they were listening, but we haven't developed that relationship yet, and so we're kind of having to go through those growing pains a little bit. So they said, I'm going to do this, and I have to say, well, okay, then I'm going to do that. And then we're going to get to the resolution eventually.
And you can reach Darrin at Darrin_Mish on Twitter.
And at my website at getirshelp.com. That's getirshelp.com. Or toll free at 888-438-6474. 888-GET-MISH. The number again is 888-438-6474.
You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We've had a great time today in studio with John. We'll be back after this next break. Any more updates back there for the listeners on traffic, Pat, or still just a hot mess?
It's still a hot mess. If you are on that Howard Franklin Bridge, you're crawling along anywhere from Howard and Armenia, southbound 275, all the way over to the bridge. This accident happened an hour and a half ago. It was involving a flatbed truck carrying drywall, and it hit a road ranger. Avoid it if you can, southbound into Pinellas County. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. I am the IRS Solution Attorney.
Pat loves to do that. I'm your co-host, Katrina Maidwell. I saw you pop the mics on in red like I wasn't paying attention.
I was actually in mid-sentence and I
know.
saw it. And I'm like, okay, we're back. So
thank you for listening. We've had a great show today. We actually had John, which is one of Darrin's clients, share his experience and his story that they're actually still in the middle of.
Yeah, he's very bravely come down here and flew down to Florida and came into the studio. I did not pay for this trip down to Florida. He paid for that on his own dime. But the promise is that when his problem is solved, he's going to get a trip down to Florida. Whether or not it involves a first class airfare, I'm not really sure. We'll have to negotiate.
I guarantee you it will.
Pat pretty much nailed that on the head, though. You can book him Southwest, $25 early bird. He can get like A1.
My wife is leaving for Boston in the morning, and someone booked her a flight. It's taking off. The wheel's up at 5 a.m.
Yeah,
I've been on some of those.
What?
I've been on those,
What
especially
kind of
if you're going out
person
west.
goes
The good news is
in the morning?
going through security is a breeze because there's nobody there.
Well, you cannot get there 2 hours early because the TSA guys don't get there until about 4:30, I think.
You don't have
kidding?
TSA pre-check?
They do not get there all that
So
early.
you're telling me I don't have to get there tomorrow at 3?
No. If you got
Not
there
for a 5 a.m. flight.
If you got there at 4, you'll be fine.
Okay, that was my plan.
Yeah, that was going to be your plan anyway. Was to
but-
get there at 4.
Yeah.
They keep scaring you to say 2 hours early.
He'll breeze right
yeah.
through.
Not
Not at
for a
that
5
hour.
a.m.
See, I learned so much on this show. Thank you.
It's kind of like a
Exactly.
domino effect. Like once it starts, you can't get that time back. But it starts out on time, so you breeze right through.
Okay, very good. I can get up at kind of a normal hour.
See, here on the IRS Solution Attorney Show, we
Yes,
talk about all
yes,
kinds of things. We talk
everything.
about traffic. We talk about airfare schedule, or airline schedules, all kinds of things.
But we do have a story in the headlines that we want to chat about, and that's 5 scammers arrested in the IRS impersonation scheme.
This is really a cool story because I don't know. There's probably people out in the listening audience that have had this experience. I've certainly had it where you get this phone call. It's usually a voicemail at the house or sometimes at the business where there's a guy typically with an Indian or East Asian accent that says he's from the IRS and they're going to file a lawsuit and they're going to arrest you and all this stuff's going to happen. And it turns out.
Wow, the IRS is outsourcing now. Lovely.
Well, I don't know about that, but typically, so I've gotten those calls, and actually the first time it ever happened, my wife heard the voicemail, and she called me immediately, and she was freaked out, and she told me about it, and I kind of laughed good-naturedly at her. I said, honey, that's a scam. That's somebody who's just trying to fish for
You should have
information.
saved the message so we could play it on the air. That would have been awesome.
Okay, I'll do that. If I run into it, I'll do that because it happens to my clients a lot. Well, this is good
If you
news.
have it, call in the studio because we would love to get the audio. 888-404-1010. Give Pat your number. We'll call you back. Get the audio. 888-404-1010. I know somebody's gotten this call on their voicemail.
So this news story is really good news. TIGTA, which is the Treasury Inspector General, I don't know, something like that. Anyways, the Treasury Department investigators have actually popped 5 people for running these IRS scams where they fleeced nearly $2 million from over 1,500 victims as part of a scheme where they impersonated IRS agents. And kind of the scam kind of runs like this typically. Hey, you owe us a bunch of money. But if you give us, you owe us $100,000, but if you give us $15,000 today, you won't be arrested and things like that. And actually, I have a client right now who somehow was convinced to give this guy $30,000 worth of iTunes gift cards. I mean, that's like head smacking. It's like the Treasury's taking iTunes
believe
gift cards
somebody
out.
fell for that.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I'm not making fun of her. It's just like it's
off. It's a little off.
Yeah, that's a little bit off. But anyway, Surprisingly, they caught these guys down in Miami. That's not surprising at all.
I was going to ask you if it was like out of the country or somewhere here, but of course, Miami.
So
a little bit of both, out of the country and here.
So they caught these guys down in Miami, and it looks like they're going to go to prison for quite a while.
Did they catch them from the IP address or whatever they're?
It doesn't say. The news story doesn't say, but the criminal complaint was filed in Minnesota, which I think is actually pretty funny because these guys down from Miami are going to have to go up to the frozen north and deal with their criminal problems up there. And who knows where the Federal Bureau of Prisons is going to send them eventually.
And it's about that time, isn't it, Pat? Oh, yes, it is. He's back there asleep on the job. You guys want to heckle me for being late.
Today is this is the segment of the show called the IRS Train Wreck of the Week. Typically, we have a nice train wreck noise, but our producer, Pat George, just been like, he's exhausted from traffic reports today, so he couldn't come up with the noise, but better late than never. So
that's
anyway,
right. That's what I
today's train wreck of the week is really great. It's about a client of mine. He's been a client for quite some time. And he owed the IRS about $155,000 in change. And he's actually a firefighter in Tampa, and he does a little bit of real estate investing on the side. And so he came to me. We got him all caught up and filed and whatnot. And we filed what's called an offer in compromise. An offer in compromise is where you make a deal to settle for less with the IRS, and it's based on some relatively simple math that I won't go into right now. But we offered in this case $1,240 for a $155,000 liability because that's how the math worked out. And that would have been an absolutely screaming deal. I mean, that's like something like 1% or something, a little bit less than 1%. Well, that offer took about, because he's self-employed, it ended up taking at least a year before the IRS worked on it. The IRS called us and had some questions. We had to have this client actually had to file a 2015 tax return, and lo and behold, he experienced the phenomenon that John is experiencing right now. Once he gave the case to me, he started feeling better and he started performing better in his self-employed gig.
I want to know how a firefighter is self-employed and owes money.
Well, because the firefighter is going to work shifts that are something like 15 days a month because they work 24-hour shifts. So he's got a bunch of time left over where he can do real estate investing and whatnot. So once he kind of had that monkey off his back, he started making more money. And so long story short, we had to increase the offer amount. It's been recommended for acceptance at this point in time, and it looks like it's going to settle for $15,540, which is still right around 10%. And,
on 150-some thousand.
Yeah. And I was telling him, if you had come into my office and I told you, hey, we can settle this for 10 cents on the dollar, you would have hugged my neck, give me a big fat kiss, and we would have been real happy. So hopefully he's really happy with that outcome. I think it's a fantastic outcome, and he's going to be able to put this behind him once and for all.
I love when you share stories like that. Any closing thoughts there, John, on the show, on your story?
No, I just think it was great watching you guys in action. I listen to every episode, and I really do. And just it's great seeing you guys work and watching, actually put some visual to what you guys do. So it was great being here.
What one piece of advice can you give the person listening that was in your position? Oh, a ton of money, just need to take that step, don't know where to start. What's the one thing?
There's always a solution available to your problems. And just because you can't come up with a solution yourself because you're type A, it doesn't mean that solution doesn't exist. Reach out to a tax attorney that you trust and let them pick the problem and solve it for you.
Leave it up to the specialist. You're listening to the IRS Solution Attorney Show. We've been so great having you this week. Every episode is available on a podcast. We'll be here same time, same place next week, and you can get Mr. Darrin Mish at Darrin_Mish. Also, 888-GET-IRS-HELP. For this week, we're out. Did I get that right? We'll post it online.
888-GET-MISH, GetIRSHelp.com. We're out.